Hello, here I am in Tom Quad at Christchurch on March the 31st, Saturday morning, a chilly morning, sadly, after our early summer. And it's the beginning of the St Hilda's Day part of the Sunday Times Oxford Literary Festival. And I'm an old St Hilda's girl, and I'm very excited to be talking to quite a few of our alumni who are giving talks in various venues around Christchurch today. Let's go and meet the first guest, Bettany Hughes.
So I'm Bettany Hughes, historian, author and broadcaster, a very glad alumni of St Hilda's College. And I'd say what I am above all, first and foremost at the moment, is a mother.
Did you enjoy meeting all your fans this morning? There were plenty of them, weren't there?
I mean, it was great because it was a very grey morning, but how lovely to see a packed hall at 10 o'clock in the morning for us all to debate the ideas and life of Socrates. It's a very, very warm crowd here always at Oxford. Whenever I do talks anywhere in the world, you can always guarantee there are at least 3 or 4 people asleep in the audience, however scintillating your ideas are. But people do just use that moment in a kind of quiet room to have a little nap, and I don't think there was a single person asleep this morning, so that was a first and a good sign.
So yeah, we heard all about Socrates, and I'm just wondering what made you fall in love with Socrates first of all.
Interesting, isn't it? Because often I actually follow the stories of women through history. He's obviously not a woman. He's a man, quite an opinionated man as well. So he's not my obvious choice in a way. But I just think there is something so extraordinary about the idea that the point of life is to live a good life, and that you can only make life better for those around you if you yourself try to be as good as it is humanly possible to be. And that seems to me just the most brilliant basis for any kind of philosophy, or indeed any kind of a life. And this is one of Socrates' most fundamental ideas. And I was so sick of hearing about Socrates' trial and death, and about the kind of political machinations of that. And I thought, so what is the story of this man's life that led him up to come out with those really beautiful and extraordinary ideas? And I thought that as a historian, that's something I could add to the Socratic canon. I can't comment on his philosophy. I'm not going to advance that study. But as a historian, I can try to put a bit of flesh onto his bones.
It's quite a tricky job, isn't it? Because there doesn't seem to be very much written down about him at all. And he didn't write anything down himself, did he?
Socrates had an absolute allergy to the written word. So I am completely mad, in a way, to have tried to write this biography of him, because it could all be made up. You know, as far as we know, we hear about him from Plato and Aristophanes and Xenophon. But they could just be inventing their own fantasy version of who Socrates was. The one thing, though, that we do have more and more of is the archaeology of 5th century Athens, where Socrates lived, and actually the whole 5th century landscape in the Eastern Mediterranean, where Socrates was a soldier for the bulk of his life. So we can travel out to his battlefields, we can go to the temples where we worshipped, we can now walk through the packed earth colonnades that he walked under, philosophising in Athens in its golden age. So I wanted to use all that evidence to try to jigsaw puzzle together the story of the man.
Your prose has been described as the literary equivalent of CGI, computer-generated graphics. Have you got a mission to demystify ancient Greece and introduce the stories to the mass audience? Because it seems to be something you do extremely well.
Well, I mean, I think that these were just ordinary men and women, however brilliant they were and however long ago they lived. And as a species, we're very interested in other people. So I think there is no mystery about history in some sense, you know, that it's very important for us to, in a clear-sighted way, to just think it's essential to understand what was going on in their minds and in their lives, because what they did and thought affects the world that we live in. So I don't have a kind of, I've got a direct approach to history in a way, and also a very physical one, I think, that I cannot understand history unless I travel to the place where it happened, unless I stand on the banks of a river or on the brow of a hill and, you know, feel the wind in my hair or smell the smell of an orchard where an important philosophical idea was conceived. So I have a very kind of physical way of working, and I think maybe that perhaps communicates to an audience, because that's something that everybody can share. You don't have to be an academic, you don't have to speak Latin or Greek to appreciate, you know, the feel of the Mediterranean sun as it's setting over the Parthenon.
Well, I was certainly planning my next holiday to Greece this morning listening to you. It's been a great pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much indeed, Bettany Hughes.
Well, thank you very much, and go St Hilda's, I say.
Absolutely. Fascinating stuff. I'm off now to find our next duo, Simon Brett and Sophie Hannah, crime writers who are going to be talking to us about the schism that's opening up between the gory bloodbath genre of writing and the more old-fashioned, cosy, brain-teaser style of crime novel.
My name is Simon Brett. I am a crime novelist, and I'm joined by...
Sophie Hannah. I'm also a crime novelist and a poet.
And we're in Oxford to have a discussion about what I guess you'd call the cosy kind of crime fiction as opposed to the visceral forensic kind where there's blood and brains all over the walls. Is that what you think we're doing, Sophie?
Yes, well, I mean, I think the name of the event is Cosy versus Gory. And I think I'm meant to be representing the gory, which I'm not sure I am particularly gory, but I'm probably gorier than Simon. Would you agree,
Ooh, on levels of goriness, yes. I think I have very little gore, really. Yeah. My murders are more to set an intellectual process in motion. Yeah. But you aren't one of those with, forensic pathologists pulling nasty bits out of people and decorating their houses with them, are you?
No, I mean, I'm not forensic at all, but I do have, probably in each book, there is one moment of either graphic violence, I mean, very rare, but yes, occasional, yes. Or something being reported that happened in the past that was very violent. So there are moments in my books that readers have said to me, oh, that was an awful bit, I could hardly read that bit. But they're very few and far between. Yeah. But yes, they are there, so I think that's why I'm representing the gory.
Yes, I've had readers saying that was an awful bit, why'd you write that? But I think it was a critical comment, actually.
One chap said to me recently, for example, that he was reading my novel The Other Half Lives, and there's a scene that's reported after it's happened, so it's not actually happening in real time, but it's a very distressing, violent scene where two people are attacking one person, and he said he almost had to stop reading because it upset him so much. But I guess I felt that when writing the book, because so much of the narrative at the beginning of the book is to do with, is there a threat or is this woman imagining it? Mm-hmm. When the payoff finally comes and she's vindicated and we realise there is a threat, I just felt I had to show something bad happening. Otherwise, it just would have all felt like I was kind of promising all this terrible danger and not delivering.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there are times when one does need to shock one's readership into... I mean, I remember it was a thing, it was language more than... But I had a scenario where a stand-up comedian was booked into a nice genteel country pub and did a really filthy routine which upset everyone. And I mean, I could have said he did a filthy routine, but actually to make the impact I had to write it and put it in the book.
Well, I think actually this is a real issue in crime fiction because readers of crime fiction are used to murders. Murder is what crime fiction is. So if you say she was murdered, she was attacked, it was all very bad, in a way, you don't actually have the full impact of that. And often what makes something really upsetting or horrific or traumatic is the little details, not the fact that somebody tried to murder you, but the fact that they asked you for a light for their cigarette before they did it. These tiny details, which if you don't actually show what's happening, then the reader can't experience what the character has experienced. And I mean, my books are all about emotional trauma, which makes them sound really like huge fun, I know. But, they're kind of emotional psychological thrillers. So really it's essential that the reader identifies and empathises with the heroine and what she's been through.
And do you find that writing the violent scene, what effect does that have on you? Does it upset you or does it sort of expiate something in your personality?
It doesn't upset me. It kind of makes me feel that I'm showing... It makes me feel that I'm doing the job of showing people that really bad stuff happens to people, which is part of what I want to do, as well as obviously write a gripping story. I think often we just walk around and chat to people about surface things, and those people could be suffering really badly, and we don't see it. So I kind of feel that, you know, books that deal with crime, which is violent and horrible, almost have a duty to show the impact of real crime.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that completely. That, I mean, often in a way, the impact is more interesting than the crime, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think with your books, I mean, I don't feel you have a duty to show horrific crimes, because your books don't ask that the reader goes on this journey of emotional trauma. But I think that there would be a problem with a crime novel that tried to do the whole psychological impact thing without showing any of the physical violence. That would be an odd combination.
Absolutely. And I do find that I have to be careful that I don't make my victims too sympathetic, because if I over-engage, you know, the reader's interest in the victim, it becomes a different kind of book.
Yeah, and I mean, I've certainly been aware sometimes when I've been reading sort of quite hard-hitting crime fiction, I can cope with the hard-hittingness of it as long as the characters are not made too real. I think it's weird. It's like there's this optimum level of empathy that you need. The character needs to feel pretty real, and you need to be able to empathise, but not to the extent that you would in a novel that felt almost too much like your real life and too close to. So it's a kind of hard balance to achieve, really.
And are you looking forward to meeting your fans in about 5 minutes' time?
Well, I never assume before an event that the people I'll be meeting will be my fans. I don't know about you, Simon. I always assume, you know, that they could be people.
Bonus.
They could be people queuing up to tick us off and tell us how we've disappointed them over the years. So let's not take anything for granted.
They're looking for the bookshop in the Mind, Body and Spirit section.
Thank you very much for joining us, Sophie Hannah and Simon Brett. It's now mid-afternoon, and I'm joined by another group of St Hilda's alumni, one of whom, Bettany Hughes, we've already heard from, and two others, Gillian Shepherd, former Secretary of State for Education, and editor of the Sunday Times magazine, Sarah Baxter, who are all here to discuss the state of education in Britain today. Would you mind giving us a taster of what thoughts you'll be putting forward? Gillian, let me start with you.
Well, the thoughts I shall be putting forward are the thoughts I've had probably since I was in school. And the thoughts are these, that the most important thing in education at any level is the quality of the teacher and of the head teacher or the head of the institution. Because without that quality, that passion, that preparedness, that enthusiasm, you will not get a good school or a good institution, and everything else pales into insignificance, including structure and type of school, in comparison with the importance of the quality of the teacher.
Thank you. Sarah?
Hi. Well, before becoming editor of the Sunday Times magazine, I was in fact a young political reporter when Gillian Shepherd was Secretary of State for Education. And so I'm very interested to be talking to her as well about how things have developed since her day. Some of the policies that she put in place then, I think, have culminated in some of the free schools we're seeing today, and I'd be interested to hear her talk about that. I'm very interested in women's education. I've got a daughter at a girls' school. I went to a girls' school. I went to a women's college. But I've got a son at a mixed school and don't feel like sending him to a boys' school. So those kind of contradictions are worth exploring, I think. What's the best form of education for our girls and boys? And I'm a huge fan of Bettany Hughes' writing. So shall I pass on to her?
On to Bettany.
Hello. I think in some ways we're just about to commit a cardinal sin, because one thing that people always say is that everybody talks about education rather than doing it, and we are just about to talk about education for an hour. But I think what would be very good is the audience, I hear, are very, very keen to interject, and as a great fan of Socrates and Socratic dialogue, I think it'd be great to get their opinions about how they'd like to see education develop in this country as well. But Gillian, so now we're having a bit of a kind of mutual love-in. I've been a great fan of Gillian's for years, so I think we're all just going to be sort of sitting, pink-cheeked, listening to one another today.
Sadly, we're missing Zainab Badawi, who will join us shortly in the Corpus Lecture Room. Thank you very much, everybody. It's been a great pleasure talking to you.
We're sung out by the choir.
I feel like it's Christmas.
So the last slot of the day and the last of the St Hilda's talks here at the Sunday Times Oxford Literary Festival, and I'm thrilled to be joined by the best-selling novelist, screenwriter and ex-St Hilda's English Fellow, Wiliam Boyd. Greetings, William, and thanks for coming to talk to us.
Hello. Hello, it's a pleasure.
You're here to talk about your recently published novel, Waiting for Sunrise, and I'm wondering what drew you to Vienna and its milieu, to early 20th century Vienna and its milieu for this novel.
Well, I think I've been obsessed with Vienna in the way that certain cities obsess writers. Vienna's, in a long list of places I've written about, often without actually going there. And I wrote first about Vienna before I ever visited it. And then I finally got a chance to visit, and I spent some time there and went to the Freud Museum, which is his old apartments, and had a kind of Proustian time travel moment and thought, what would it have been like 100 years ago to have come to be psychoanalyzed, and felt this is the beginning of a novel, at least. So it was kind of a mixture of a sort of literary obsession and then actually being in the place and picking up the vibe.
Yeah, that's a pretty potent starting point, I can imagine. Tell us a bit about what your novel does and what it's about. It's sort of a part whodunit and part spy novel, am I right?
Well, it's a kind of my sort of facetious description of it is it's like a John Buchan novel with sex. It's a sort of, in the genre, you might say it was a kind of adventure. And a young Englishman abroad who gets embroiled with a rather risque woman, and various bad things happen, and thereby the adventure and the embroilment continues. But it starts in 1913 and goes to 1915, so World War I starts, and as a result of the events in Vienna, which represent about a third of the novel, he's kind of dragooned into the British Secret Service, a fledgling Secret Service, reluctantly, and has to go on a mission, which embroils him further. And so on the surface, there's this kind of narrative of adventure and espionage and romance, but it's actually, I think, a novel about becoming modern, about how the world changed between 1914 and 1918, and that how people at the end of the war were like us, whereas before the war they weren't. And in my character's journey, he sort of exemplifies this transformation that takes place. He's a different man at the end of the novel than he was at the beginning, and it's all because of Vienna, which of course was the great modernist city of the early 20th century.
There seems to be something in the zeitgeist about Vienna at the moment, in that era. I don't know, I've just seen the film A Dangerous Method, which covers that whole, the same milieu and the same sense of the Freudian subconscious becoming a very important part of the way we think. And I don't know if it's something to do with the beginning of a new century, or...
I think in a way it's Freud. He never goes away, however discredited he's reputedly meant to be. There's something that Freud did, some revolution that he engendered at the beginning of the 20th century that is still with us. We are all Freudians, like it or not. And so I think he's the kind of presiding spirit of the city and its influence over the years. It may be something to do with World War I, which is the 100th anniversary of its beginning is just around the corner. The extraordinary thing about that city was that everything was going on there. It wasn't just books or music. It was art, design, architecture, politics, journalism, and then you throw in Sigmund Freud, and you throw in Adolf Hitler, who was there, you throw in Joseph Stalin, who spent 6 weeks there, Trotsky lived there for 7 years. The future history of Europe was also brewing up in the first decade and a half of the 20th century. So it must have been the most extraordinary city on the planet at the time.
And I'm wondering, thinking back, whether you enjoyed your time as an English Fellow at St Hilda's. Do you remember it well?
Extremely well. It was my first proper job, and I had a little room in the college, and I taught for 3 full years there. And in a way, it was I loved teaching, actually. But I think my experience confirmed my intuition that I wasn't actually an academic. So I published 2 novels, a collection of short stories, and wrote a film before I finally gave up my academic life. But it was it was contemporaneous with my beginning of my writing career. So I associate my time at St Hilda's very much with my first novel, and the first film I wrote, and so I have very vivid memories of it, and I enjoyed myself a lot, and I taught some very interesting people as well.
Well, that's lovely to hear. I remember I was an undergraduate at that time, and everyone was very excited if they were studying English, particularly they were going to get a male tutor. There's very few males around in those days, not the case now.
That's true, and I was in my late 20s, so I wasn't much older than the undergraduates I was teaching. But so there was a sense in which I got on very well with my tutees, and I still see some of them to this day. So it was a very good experience for me. If my novels hadn't succeeded, I dare say I would have stayed on the academic career path. But in fact, my writing was going very well. And actually I was offered a better job at St Hilda's, and that's what it was, in a way, pushed me away from Oxford and to London and made me decide, no, I must just write all the time, because I wouldn't have had as much time. So it was a significant moment in my life.
Yes. And are you looking forward to meeting your fans in about 15 minutes' time?
Yes, I'm always very interested to meet my readers, and it's something comparatively recent in literary history. You think back 30 years ago, 40 years ago, authors never met their readers unless they were friends. Somebody like Graham Greene probably never met his readers, but since the explosion of literary festivals and readings, I've met tens of thousands of my readers all over the world, and it's very, very interesting. It's again very important for you to realise that as these books are bought and published, that actually the relationship, the intimate relationship that exists, is a very individual one between individual reader and author. And so suddenly to encounter 400 of them, as I'm going to do tonight, just reminds you of the real business of writing. It's that connection between the reader who buys your book and reads it and responds to it.
Well, I've heard there's lots of people wanting to come that can't get in. It's sold out, and it's a very large room. So thank you very much for joining us, Wiliam Boyd.
Thanks very much. Pleasure.